Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees. And please put a review on my podcast. That will certainly help in getting the word out there and creating more listenership. Episode 283, Colin Gardner. Colin Gardner's children from his first marriage contested his will, where he left a bulk of his estate to his second wife and the children from his second marriage in 1922. Colin was born on the 22nd of March 1835 at Bowness, West Lothian in Scotland, to John Matthew Gardner and Isabella Lang. He was the third child of four. The brothers emigrated to Victoria in September 1854, when William was 21 and Colin 19. William died at Mellowa in 1862, aged only 28. Colin married Mary Gray on the 28th of September 1857 in Beechworth, Victoria. Mary was also Scottish. They had 9 children together, with 6 surviving infancy. On the 24th of January 1865, in the Beechworth Ovens and Murray Advertiser, it states that Colin Gardner of Oxley was granted a publican's licence. On the 16th of August 1866, in the Beechworth Ovens and Murray Advertiser, there were tenders called for supplying the Oxley Church with a pulpit, seats and plaister. The plans could be seen at Mr. Colin Gardner's store in Oxley. On the 9th of July 1867, in the Beechworth Ovens and Murray Advertiser, to let a blacksmith shop, the best stand in Oxley, applied to Colin Gardner of Oxley. And on the 14th of December 1867, it mentions that Colin Gardner's Oxley Hotel was called the Black Bull Hotel. On the 29th of October 1868, in the Beechworth Ovens and Murray Advertiser, he puts an advertisement in for wanting a shopman for his general store. 4 years later, on the 24th of December 1872, in the Beechworth Ovens and Murray Advertiser, there is an advertisement for sale or to let the commercial hotel and store with post office in connection with the Oxley Plains Township. Both hotel and store do first-class business. All particulars to be obtained from Mr. Colin Gardner. On the 18th of February 1873 in the Benalla North Eastern Ensign. We learned that Mr. Peter Grimm of Eldorado's taken on the lease of the commercial hotel at Oxley Plains from the present landlord and proprietor, Mr. Colin Gardner. Mr. Gardner will still continue his business of a storekeeper, although he's relinquished that of publican. So on the 22nd of January 1874 in the Beechworth Ovens and Murray Advertiser, he's advertising for a storeman at his general store. On the 28th of February 1874 in the Ovens and Murray Advertiser in Beechworth, J.H. Gray and Company are favoured with instructions from Mr. Colin Gardner, who's giving up farming, to sell by auction his farm at Tea Garden Creek, Oxley, all of his farm, stock and implements. On the 26th of February 1876 in the Beechworth Ovens and Murray Advertiser, it says from Mellowa, a fire broke out at 10:30 p.m. on the 20th at the premises of Mr. Colin Gardner at Mellowa. The premises was occupied by Mr. P. Grimm and known as the Commercial Hotel. The fire was first observed bursting forth in the kitchen, which was fortunately detached from the main building, known as the hotel. It being a Saturday night, many men employed all the week at agricultural pursuits were enjoying their case and their glass. As soon as the alarm was given, these men turned out with a will, and buckets were supplied from the stores, a plentiful supply of water being near at kettles, where 2 pumps and a large tank which had just been filled for the bathhouse were kept constantly going, the women pumping and supplying the buckets to the willing men. The fire was confined to the kitchen and stables. Had the wind been blowing towards the hotel, its contents would have been destroyed. The women exerted themselves gallantly, and the brave men seconded their efforts and fought manfully against the fire. The main building had a very narrow escape, for the windows in the rear were all broken, the paint blistered, and the wood of the doors and windows scorched. Wet blankets on the shingles, thrown on all exposed parts, and kept well saturated, were of great assistance in confining the flames to those portions which were at first attacked. Great mystery seems to envelop the cause of the fire. A smaller fire had been discovered in the dining room of the hotel on Thursday, but was quickly extinguished. A court of inquiry will sit, and all evidence connected therewith will be laid before the public. Mr. Gardner was insured in regards to the hotel, but not in regards to the kitchen and outbuildings. Some damage was done to his stock in his store, which adjoins the hotel. Mr. Gardner, with commendable presence of mind, removed all of his books, and most of his stock was carried into the public thoroughfare. It speaks much for the honesty of the crowd attracted that few articles are missing. Mr. Gardner and Mr. and Mrs. Grimm are grateful for the assistance rendered. On the 15th of December 1877, in the Ovens and Murray Advertiser of Beechworth, it says Mr. Colin Gardner has purchased 600 acres of land. His wife Mary died on the 19th of February 1878 in Wangaratta. She was only 39, and their youngest child, the baby, Mary Agnes Ellen Gardner, passed away only a month later. On the 21st of February 1878 in the Beechworth Ovens and Murray Advertiser, it announces the death of Mrs. Colin Gardner, and it says she was a much respected wife of Colin Gardner of Oxley, and she died on Tuesday at 8:30am. She'd been suffering for a long time and had but shortly returned from Melbourne, where she'd undergone medical treatment. She'll be much missed by her large family and as a kind neighbour. On the 16th of April 1878, Colin was appointed a magistrate in the Northern Bailiwick, and he married Mary Smith in 1883 at Millawa. He was 48 and Mary 27. Mary had been born at Campbell's Creek in Victoria. Her parents were both Scottish and they'd immigrated in 1853. In the Beechworth Ovens and Murray Advertiser, it announced their marriage on the 30th of October at the Presbyterian Church at Millawa. Colin Gardner, merchant of Millawa, to Mary, third daughter of Mr. James Smith, farmer of Millawa. And they celebrated their silver wedding anniversary, which was placed in the Melbourne Argus on the 29th of October 1908. And it says that Colin Gardner, JP, son of the late J.M. Gardner of Bowness in Scotland, to Mary, third daughter of James Smith of Millawa, and their present address was Erkledoon at Millawa. Colin and Mary had 4 children together, and Colin died on the 12th of February 1921 in Oxley. The Benalla North Eastern Ensign announced his death. Mr. Colin Gardner, a pioneer settler of Millawa near Wangaratta, died last week from heart failure at the age of 86. He arrived in Melbourne in 1852 by the ship the Cheviot. The city streets were then unpaved and bullock teams often became bogged in them. Melbourne, south of the Yarra, was a little colony of tents. It was called Canvas Town and largely contained the wives and children of the diggers. Colin went to work at Langland's foundry, firstly, at £3 a week. He then followed into hotel keeping for a time and in 1856 settled down on land in the Wangaratta district, established a store at Millawa. He purchased beef and mutton for Captain Morgan the bushranger. The deceased used to say that Morgan was the most silent man that he ever met. And if you're interested in knowing more about Daniel Morgan the bushranger, I did an episode 37, on him. The late Mr. Gardner was a prominent resident, a Justice of the Peace, besides which he was the holder of several public positions. He's survived by his wife and 9 children. Mr. Gardner, the President of the Oxley Shire, is his son. On the 27th of July 1922 in the Melbourne Age, a Wangaratta Scot, keen fight over will, his diary, his will and his 2 families. The life story of a tall Scotsman described as a nice but determined old fellow with a Roman nose who kept a diary, split wood with a hammer and a wedge until he was nearly 80 years of age, smoked strong black tobacco that his doctor said was sufficient to kill a horse, married twice and had 2 families, and died in his 80s, leaving £19,000 worth of property behind him, is in course of unfolding day by day before Justice McFarlane in the 3rd Civil Court. The deceased Colin Gardner owned a store, a hotel and farm properties at Millawa near Wangaratta and heavily favoured his second family with his will. Hence the trouble which is being ventilated in the court. The aged Scot in his lifetime made a substantial gift of land to the only son of his second marriage, Wilfred, and by his will gave a life interest in his remaining property, £19,000, to his widow, that is his second wife, at whom death the property is to go down to his favourite son, Wilfred, subject to bequests of £1,000 each to 2 of the daughters and £2,000 to the third daughter of his second marriage. Against this will, made in 1915, Mrs. Wilhelmina Wright and Mrs. Frances Beecroft, daughters of the first marriage, lodged a caveat, disputing the probate on the grounds that the testator was not of testamentary capacity, that the will was not executed in conformity with the Wills Act, and that undue influence had been exercised by the second wife and her son Wilfred. The widow and a number of relatives and friends from Wangaratta were in the court yesterday when evidence was given by Wilfred MacDonald Gardner, the only son of the second marriage, to whom the father made a gift in 1910 of some 2,200 acres of land, worth £10,000. To his son James, the old man gave him in his lifetime some capital to set him up in a business, and subsequently James came into possession as a tenement of the hotel and store at Millawa. James and his father, it was shown, had not been on the best of terms. During the testator's absence in England, James was alleged to have removed quantities of his father's goods to his own store at Oxley, and on learning which, the old Scot was reported to have said, "Well, God will judge him," and cut James out of his will. However, it was not denied that James had proved a capable man of business, netting for himself in later years a comparative fortune in his own business. With the other members of the first family, testator, it was shown, had various differences. His second marriage was not popular, and some of the members of the family vacated the family roof, to the old Scot's great annoyance. He was further hurt when a daughter persisted in marrying a police constable. The daughter reminded her father that he'd married to please himself, and that the daughter proposed to marry to please herself. The old man, it is said, never forgot it. He cut the daughter off with £50. She's one of the two daughters who dispute the will. With his third son of the first marriage, Colin Gardner, the old man had a difference because, having apprenticed him to blacksmithing, the son drifted into the police force. He cut that son off with £200. With his only son of the second marriage, the testator remained on good terms. His son, it was stated, was the prop of the old man's declining years. To him, the testator made the gift of £10,000 worth of land in his lifetime, as well as by the will the residue of his estate after his widow's demise. The two daughters of the first marriage alleged that this son, Wilfred, used undue influence, which Wilfred denied. Under examination by Mr. Bryant, he said that in 1908 the following conversation took place between himself and the testator. Wilfred said, "What about giving me a paddock, Dar, and letting me go on my own?" His father said, "You stay here, all will be yours one day." Wilfred said, "I don't doubt your word, Dar, but I might be here until I'm 40. You may have a long time yet, I hope you do, and at any time you might have a quarrel with me and cut me off with practically nothing. So after working all of my life here, I get nothing." Witness said the old man did not like the conversation and it was not renewed. About a year later, he mentioned the subject again, and again the old man said, "You will get all." "But what about the others?" he asked. "They will get none," said the old man shortly. Nothing more was said. When the testator made up his mind, he was not easily shifted. Wilfred said nothing more and was considerably surprised when in 1910 the testator came home one day from Wangaratta and remarked briefly, "I have made the forest paddocks, 2,200 acres, over to you." The witness thanked him. Mr. Bryant drew his Honour's attention to the fact that the signature of the testator on his last will and testament, executed in 1915, was almost copperplate. Under cross-examination by Mr. Latham, Wilfred Gardner said that in the later years, the testator left his affairs to him. Wilfred ran his father's banking account like his own. He signed the cheques, and he considered that he had more than paid back, by the way of income from his New South Wales property, the money he took from his father's account, with his father's assent, to stock up the New South Wales property with sheep. His own account was overdrawn. His father's account was almost overdrawn by £7,000. Mr. Latham asked, "Was it not true that your father was not fit to sign a transfer?" And Wilfred said he could sign it when the thing was explained to him. "Was there some discussion in your father's presence about his capacity to do business?" He said yes. "When it was said it is no good asking him to sign a transfer, did you not say, 'That can be got over'?" "Possibly I did, but when I explained the thing to him, he was fit to do business." "But had you a better chance to get him to do anything than anyone else?" "In 1920 I was, and possibly a few years before that." "The whole of his affairs were in your hands since 1910? He said since 1914 they were. "Can you mention one occasion when he refused to do anything you suggested?" "I would never ask him to do a thing about which I did not think he was satisfied." Further examined, Wilfred Gardner said that about the time of the transfer of the testator's hotel and store to James Gardner, the witness's stepbrother, there was a quarrel. Jim called Wilfred a cad, and he told Jim afterwards that if he still felt the same way, that he would meet him somewhere at any time. "Did the bank draft grow to £10,000 under your management?" He said in 1912 it went down to £23 after having been up to £1,846 in 1910. I had to pay £1,063 for stock. Mrs. Wilhelmina Wright, one of the covetresses, who received £50 upon the death or remarriage of the testator's widow, said that she was the wife of Frederick Wright of High Street, Essendon, and a daughter of the testator by the first marriage. After her father had returned from the honeymoon following his second marriage in 1883, the witness went to get some cash from a room, but for the first time in her life she found the door locked. In January 1884, she had a slight difference with Mrs. Gardner, who had said things about her brother Jim. She herself was the first to leave the home. She had never taken a roll of serge from her father's store at Millawa. In 1911, she paid a visit to the home. Her father did not seem to know who she was, even after Mrs. Gardner had said, "Here is Min." He made no inquiries about her husband or her family. In July 1915, when he again failed to recognise her, she said, thinking that it would recall to him her childhood days when he gave her a nickname, "Don't you remember Punk?" The testator replied, No, he took no notice of her when she cried. The witness said that she did not attend her father's second marriage because her eyesight was affected and her general health was not good. Mr. Robertson said, "There is no doubt that the members of the first family were displeased with their father marrying such a young woman as your stepmother." She said, "Well, I do not know. I knew very well father would marry somebody. I do not think there was any unpleasantness about it at the time." "What is the difference in the ages?" "Mrs. Gardner is 66 and I am 50. "You drifted away from your father?" "No, not up until the time of his death." "Why did you stop corresponding with him?" "I do not know when I ceased corresponding." "Your relationship with the old home was always friendly?" "Yes." Colin Gardner, Senior Constable of Police at Nathalia, said he was the youngest child by the first marriage, and he remembered Mrs. Wright and his brother James leaving the home shortly after his father's second marriage. Fan, Mrs. Beecroft, and himself remained. If they were seated at the table when their father was not present and Mrs. Gardner came in, she would immediately walk out of the room. On one occasion, the witness saw his father putting a bolt on a door leading to the store. His father said, "It is to keep you out." The witness said, "I will leave the place. I would like to take the blankets from my bed, a horse, saddle and bridle." He asked his father for some money. The testator wrote out a cheque, but tore it to pieces a moment afterwards. Having stayed with his father's consent at James Gardner's house at Oxley, the witness returned to the home, and on his 15th birthday his father took him to a blacksmith and said, "You've got to learn this trade." Subsequently, the witness again went home and found his father drunk. His stepmother said, "You are not going to stop here. You haven't got the spunk to go out and earn your own living." The witness finally left home without a penny. Continuing, Gardner said that he eventually joined the police force. His father did not object, although he had arranged another apprenticeship for him. When he visited Millawa in 1912, his father was a very feeble old man and did not attempt to join in conversation. The most he said was yes or no. On the occasion of another visit in May 1915, he asked his father whether he remembered the black cob which threw Neddy Wheeler, an Aborigine, and whether he recollected wanting to put a stitch in Wheeler's ear, which was seriously injured. The testator replied in the negative. The witness specifically timed his father's speech by the clock. For 12 minutes, the testator did not say a word. The witness again tested his father's memory regarding Wheeler, and the testator merely rubbed his hand on his thigh and tapped his foot on the floor. Referring to a letter written to him by his stepmother in 1906, and which reflected on the actions of certain members of the first family, the witness said that he did not destroy the letter because he thought of the possibility of trouble between the two families when their father died. He did not disclose its contents for the reason that he did not wish to give his father any anxiety or worry. And it took another 3 weeks before the Benalla Standard announced on the 18th of August 1922 the final settlement. A final settlement in the family dispute over the will of the late Colin Gardner of Millawa was announced in the Practice Court in Melbourne. The terms of the settlement were not announced, but it is known that Mr. Duke Gardner, the testator's second son by his second marriage, agreed, with the consent of the other executors, to make certain concessions to the children of the first marriage, as the result of which probate will be granted without further opposition from the covetresses to the last will of 1915 of the testator. His Honour made an order accordingly. Mr. Justice McFarlane congratulated the parties upon the settlement. The witnesses on both sides, he remarked, were a fine type of men and women whom it would be a pity to see fight a case of this sort to the bitter end. The terms of the settlement, it is understood, provide that the executors pay within 12 months from the date, without interest, £300 to Colin Gardner, £150 to Mrs. Wright, and £150 to Mrs. Beecroft. The executors to pay the covetresses the costs between the party and parties. And on the 1st of September 1941 in the Melbourne Argus, it announced the death of Mary Gardner on the 31st of August at her residence Ercildoune at Millawa, and that she was the dear mother of Wilfred of Millawa, Beatrice, Mrs. Wilson of Springhurst, Nellie, Mrs. Kershaw of Caulfield, Naomi, Mrs. Lloyd of East St Kilda, and she was 84. So a little on his children. Firstly, his children from his first marriage. John Matthew Gardner was born in 1858 at Hurdle Flat in Victoria. He married Mary Wilson Gray on the 14th of March 1879 at William Gray's house in Oxley when they were 21, and they had 8 children together. John died on the 1st of May 1935 in Toowoomba, Queensland. And on the 8th of May 1935 in the Melbourne Sun News Pictorial, it stated that John Matthew Gardner, 77, a member of a well-known district family, died while on a visit to Queensland. He had lived at Millawa all his life. The second child was Isabella Lang Gardner, who was born in 1859 at Spring Hill Farm at Millawa. Isabella married Andrew Ferguson in 1882, and they had 4 children with 2 surviving infancy. In 1903, they were running a hotel in Wangaratta, and she died on the 8th of July 1911 at Bulla, Victoria, aged only 52. The third child was James Gray Gardner, who was born on the 31st of May 1861 in Oxley. John married Margaret Ferguson in 1884, and they had 5 children together. On the 26th of February 1887, in the Beechworth Ovens Murray Advertiser, it announced in the Wangaratta Licensing Court that James Gray Gardner had transferred the Oxley Hotel to Robert Dulop, and that James Colin Gardner of the Commercial Hotel Millawa transferred it to James Gray Gardner. He's still the licensee of the Commercial Hotel at Millawa in 1889. In 1903 in the census, James Gray Gardner is listed as a storekeeper at Millawa, and he's continuing that profession in 1909. It mentions on the 12th of August 1911 in the Wangaratta North Eastern Dispatch that Mr. and Mrs. James G. Gardner of the Commercial Hotel and Store of Millawa. And James died in Box Hill, Victoria on the 15th of January 1937. The fourth child from the first marriage, Wilhelmina Johanna Gardner, was born in 1863. Her marriage was announced on the 15th of May 1886 in the Beechworth Ovens and Murray Advertiser. On Wednesday the 5th of May, the ceremony of marriage was performed at St Andrew's Church, Oxley, between Miss Wilhelmina Gardner, second daughter of Mr. Colin Gardner, the well-known storekeeper of Millawa, and Mr. Frederick Wright, blacksmith and wheelwright of Tullamarine. The bridal party were accompanied by a large number of relatives and friends of the bride and bridegroom from the residence of the bride's brother, Mr. James G. Gardner, storekeeper of Oxley, and were met at the church by quite a crowd of guests who'd been invited to the wedding. They had their silver wedding anniversary on the 5th of May 1911, which was announced in the Melbourne Argus, and it stated that Frederick was the third son of the late Wallace Wright of Tullamarine and Wilhelmina the second daughter of Colin Gardner of Millawa. They lived their whole married life at Tullamarine and had 4 children, and Wilhelmina died in East Kew, Victoria, aged 82 in 1945. The fifth child of the first marriage, Christine Frances Gardner, was born in 1866 in Oxley, Victoria. On the 15th of November 1889 in the Euroa Advertiser, her marriage to Frank Beecroft was announced. They were married at Millawa on the 5th of November, and he was the second son of Mr. W. Beecroft of Longwood to Christine Frances, youngest daughter of Colin Gardner of Millawa. He was a butcher, but Frank, before being employed as a butcher, was employed by Mr. Gloucester, the draper in Seymour, and he was also a hawker, and Frank was known to be a sympathiser of the Kelly gang. Ned Kelly and his gang bailed up 22 hostages at Faithful Creek Station on the 10th of December 1878. This station was near Euroa and 27 miles west of Benalla. They were locked in a storeroom. A Seymour hawker named James Gloucester arrived at Faithful Creek Station during the hold-up of the Kelly gang. Then, leaving Joe Byrne to guard the prisoners, Ned, Dan and Steve Hart drove to Euroa in James Gloucester's hawker's cart. At 4 p.m, Ned Kelly entered the Euroa bank with a drawn gun, with Dan Kelly coming in from the rear. And 10 minutes later, they were out on the street again, richer by £2,000. They'd forced the bank staff and Mr. Scott's family to accompany them back to the station, so no alarm was given. Before leaving their hostages, the bushrangers gathered everyone outside, where they entertained them with trick riding. Ned told them that no one was to leave until 3 hours had passed from the time of their departure. On the 13th of November 1878, Frank was brought up at the deposition, and it's recorded that on the evening of the 9th, Mr. Gloucester and I arrived at Faithful Creek Station and met the Kelly gang. Ned Kelly took me with him into Euroa for the robbery. He paid me £2 and gave me the silver watch taken from the body of Constable Lonigan, and I gave it to the police. Frank also gave evidence at Ned Kelly's trial regarding a conversation he'd had with Ned Kelly about the murders of the 3 policemen at Stringy Bark Creek. On the 10th of August 1880 in the Melbourne Argus, it says that Frank Beecroft deposed that in December 1878 I was in Mr Gloucester's employment. On the 9th of that month we were stuck up by the Kelly gang at Young Husband Station and locked in a storeroom with 16 other persons. The prisoner kept guard over us in the room during the night. The prisoner talked a good deal. He told us all about the murder of the police in the Wombat Ranges. He said, we came upon the police, 2 of them were McIntyre and Lonigan, by the camp, and we called upon them to surrender. McIntyre threw up his hands and Lonigan ran for a log. Lonigan got behind the log and was firing at me, when I fired at him and shot him in the head. He also said that the man was a fool for running away. He then said that when Kennedy and Scanlon came up, he called upon them to surrender and Scanlon tried to fire at them with his gun and that he then shot him on his horse. He also said that whilst watching Kennedy and Scanlon, thinking the latter was shamming, McIntyre escaped. That Kennedy fired at him from tree to tree until he ran into an open piece of ground and held up his hands. That Ned Kelly thought Kennedy was going to fire again. That he therefore fired again at Kennedy, who then fell. And he said to Kennedy, I will have to go, and as I don't want to leave you in a dying state, I'll have to shoot you. Kennedy asked to be allowed to live, but Ned Kelly shot him dead and covered him up with a cloak. The prisoner had a rifle at Euroa, a Spencer rifle, which he said he took from Scanlon. He showed us how to load and unload it at the stock. Towards the morning I fell asleep. He said, I'm 20 years of age and my parents live at Longwood. I have been for 2 years in Mr Gloucester's employ and I'm still in his service. Mr Gloucester told me he'd written an account of the affair, but it was never shown or read to me. Constable McKirk interviewed me at Euroa a month ago. Mr Gloucester was not present. I wrote a statement myself. I wrote out my statement at Detective Ward's request and sent it to him. Mr Gloucester had asked me to remember Kelly's statement about the death of Sergeant Kennedy. I cannot say that on the occasion when Mr Gloucester and I talked about the Kellys that we compared our recollections of what occurred at Young Husband Station. When Kelly's name cropped up, we generally spoke about what took place at the station. We never placed our statements on the matter side by side. I can't remember Mr Gloucester ever asking me, do you recollect what Kelly told us about shooting Kennedy on the ground? But I cannot state positively that he has never asked me such a question. Mr Gloucester was present when I was interviewed last week by Sub-Inspector Kennedy. Frank joined the police force in 1886. They lived at Barwon, Longwood, Heidelberg, Eldorado, Benalla and Wangyu, and he was also the publican of the Cumberland Hotel from the 31st of January 1904 after he retired from the police force. Christine and Frank had 5 children together. Frank died in 1904 at Wangyu. It says Mr Frank May Beecroft died at his residence, Cumberland Hotel, at the age of 45 years. He was a member of the police force for 18 years and only recently received his discharge owing to ill health. The cause of death was phthisis, and he left a wife and 3 children. There was a lengthy obituary in the Numurkah Leader on the 9th of December 1904. It is with the most sincere regret that we have this morning to chronicle the death of Mr Frank May Beecroft of the Cumberland Hotel at Wangyu. For a lengthy period, Mr Beecroft has been suffering from phthisis, and more than once he's been so bad that it was feared he would never leave his room again. A few weeks ago he became so ill he had to remain in his room, and at 2 o'clock on Saturday morning the last call came and he passed peacefully away. There was a very great assemblage to pay the last tribute of respect to the deceased. The fraternity of Masons paid the last honours to their late brother, both the Nathalia and Numurkah lodges being largely represented. The brethren marching in front of the hearse from the house to the cemetery. Frank Beecroft came to this district more than 20 years ago and resided between Numurkah, Wangyu and Nathalia for most of this time. He was first employed by Mr Callender in the butchering business and subsequently by Mr Kinnard and Mr Woodhouse of Wangyu. In 1886 he became a member of the police force, from which, owing to failing health, he received his discharge 12 months ago. As an officer of the police, he performed his duties faithfully but courteously, and in his private capacity he was always ready to assist a good cause. And many who had been left in distress had to thank Frank Beecroft for his helping hand. Whilst in the constabulary, he was first stationed in Nathalia and afterwards in charge of Bendo, Edi, Eldorado, Swanpool and Wangyu. When he retired from the service, he purchased the Cumberland Hotel at Wangnu, and during the few months of his control of that property proved himself to be a hospitable and popular landlord. He had the somewhat unique experience during his life of being twice stuck up by bushrangers, once by Power and subsequently by the Kelly Gang. He retained a vivid recollection of the incidents and could relate them in a most entertaining manner. Mr. Beecroft leaves a wife and 3 children to mourn the loss of a good and loving husband and father. And Christine died on the 3rd of October 1947 in Gainsborough, Victoria. The 6th child of the first marriage was Colin Campbell Gardner, who was born in 1870 in Oxley. He married Jessie Mitchell Finlay in 1896 and they had 2 sons. In 1906, he was a police constable stationed at Beechworth. On the 27th of June 1908, in the Ovens Murray Advertiser of Beechworth, it says Constable Colin Campbell Gardner, having received intimation of his transfer to Shepparton, where he would take charge of the police jail and assist in the office, meaning promotion, the occasion was taken by the bench and those present to congratulate Constable Gardner on his advancement. Mr. J. Rowan, PM, on behalf of the bench of magistrates, said he could testify to Colin Gardner's uniform courtesy and general efficiency during his term of office in Beechworth. Mr. Mackay found Constable Gardner courteous and prompt on every occasion. Mr. J. McNamara, CPS, said he had been the most impartial and considerate of any officer ever stationed here. Sergeant Blade said that he was very sorry to lose the services of Constable Gardner. During his 2 years' residence in Beechworth, he'd never known him to exhibit any partiality or irritation and had always been the most conscientious in the discharge of his official duties. Constable Gardner expressed his thanks for the kind remarks made and could not help feeling affected at leaving Beechworth. He'd only tried to do his duty and hoped that wherever he might go, the same kindly feeling might be extended to him. On the 9th of September 1909 in the Melbourne Age, on the 15th of January 1914 in the Shepparton Advertiser, Constable Colin Campbell Gardner, watch housekeeper at Shepparton, has been promoted to the charge of Waggunya, which is on the Victorian side of the River Murray opposite Corowa. Mr. Gardner has proven to be a good and honourable citizen, and we all regret his departure from Shepparton. Mr. Gardner had the satisfaction of knowing that his transfer to another town meant promotion for him, so there are regrets alongside congratulations. Mr. Gardner, Mrs. Gardner and their family wished a long life, prosperity and everything that was good in their future career. Mr. Gardner was presented a handsome pair of silver-backed brushes and a comb for Mrs. Gardner. Mr. Gardner responded and thanked the people of Shepparton for the many kindnesses shown to him during his residence here. Had it not been for the sake of the promotion, he would never have accepted transfer elsewhere. He had great fondness for Shepparton. It was the only place that reminded him of the home that he left when a boy. On the 7th of July 1922 in the Rutherglen Sun and Chiltern Valley Advertiser, it says the Police Promotions Board has recommended promotions for second-class sergeant to Colin Campbell Gardner. On the 23rd of November 1934 in the Melbourne Argus, it announced that Jessie Mitchell Gardner had passed away in Baldwin on the 22nd of November, that she was the beloved wife of Colin Campbell Gardner and loving mother of Colin and John, and she was 65. And Colin died in 1952 at the age of 82. Colin Sr.'s children with Mary Smith, his second wife, Wilfred, who we heard a lot about in the case of the will. Wilfred MacDonald Gardner was known as Duke, and he was born in 1884 at Oxley. On the 22nd of July 1905 in the Beechworth and Ovens Murray Advertiser, there was a social evening at Millawa, and it says a very pleasant social evening was spent at Urkeldoon in Millawa on Monday evening when a large number of friends of Mr. and Mrs. C. Gardner responded to an invitation to take part in the good old custom of celebrating their son Duke's 21st birthday. Mr. G. H. Brown presided and proposed a toast to Wilfred Gardner and congratulated him on attaining to manhood's estate and referring to his sterling qualities. On the 13th of December 1913 in the Wangaratta North Eastern Dispatch, it says Mr. Duke Gardner has added to his interests by opening a blacksmith shop in the township of Millawa and advertises that he's engaged a good horseshoer to conduct that branch of the business. And he married Beatrice Edith Sheridan on the 12th of May 1919 in Wangaratta when he was 34 and Beatrice 22. They had 10 children together. On the 20th of May 1944 in the Melbourne Australiasian, it says Gardner in the northeast of Victoria around Millawa Way is a name known by and large. It is a name honoured and respected throughout the countryside, for the Gardner family has played an important role in the district for many years. By reason of numbers alone, the family is unique. There are 10 children in all, 4 girls and 6 boys. According to the parents, Mr. and Mrs. Duke Gardner, they're an ideal family. In those halcyon days before the war and before manpower problems completely changed people's ways of life, Mr. Gardner had the assistance on his properties of his 3 eldest sons and 6 men. Today, the men are in the services and so are the 3 boys. Don is serving in New Guinea, Colin is stationed at Darwin, and Jock is in the Navy and at sea. So Iona and Heather Gardner are their father's sole assistants on his 3,000-acre properties. Ercildoune is one of the most picturesque properties in the northeast, and at one time comprised of no fewer than 14 farms. Mr. Gardner found it impossible to carry the majority of the dairy farms, and so the bulk of the land has been turned into grazing areas and is stocked with sheep and cattle. In all, there are 4,000 sheep and 300 head of cattle. Iona and Heather are skilled horsewomen, and there is no work on the property they cannot and do not tackle, but they excel at mustering and drafting and droving the stock. And Duke died on the 11th of April 1972 in Wangaratta, aged 87. The second child of the second marriage was Mary Gertrude Beatrice Gardner, who was born in 1886 in Oxley. She married Thomas Graham Wilson on the 10th of May 1921 at St John's Church in Elstonwick. And it states that Thomas Graham Wilson was the third son of Mrs. Wilson and the late Thomas Wilson of Home Station, Millawa, and Mary Beatrice was the eldest daughter of Mrs. Gardner and the late Colin Gardner of Ercildoune. They had a son, Thomas Jr., in September 1922, and Mary died on the 1st of April 1951 in Wangaratta, aged 65. The third child was Nellie Alberta Wilson Gardner, who was born in 1889 at Millawa. On the 25th of June 1910 in the Wangaratta Northeastern Dispatch, it announced the wedding of Mrs. Nellie A.W. Gardner, daughter of Colin Gardner of Ercildoune, to Mr. G.R. Kershaw, watchmaker and jeweller of Wangaratta, the eldest son of Mr. John Kershaw of Horsham. They married at St. Paul's Presbyterian Church in Wangaratta. Mr. Duke Gardner, the brother of the bride, was best man. A large gathering of friends assembled at the railway station, and the happy couple was sent off with hearty congratulations of their friends. The honeymoon will be spent in Sydney, and Mr. and Mrs. Kershaw's future home will be at Wangaratta. On the 22nd of June 1935, they celebrated their silver wedding anniversary, and it says that George was the eldest son of the late Mr. and Mrs. George Kershaw of Horsham, and Nellie was known to her friends and family as Bud, and she was the second daughter of Mrs. Colin Gardner and the late Mr. Colin Gardner. At this stage, Mrs. Colin Gardner was living in Armidale, Victoria. And Nellie died on the 19th of August 1947 in East Malvern at the age of 58. And the youngest child of the family was Naomi Jean Blanche Gardner, who was born on the 26th of October 1900 at Millawa. She was known to family and friends as Omi. She married Vaughan Wellington Lloyd in Victoria in 1933. Vaughan was 7 years younger than Naomi. Vaughan was a farmer who lived at Babinawarra. In the year that they got married, on the 28th of October 1933, in the Melbourne Sun News Pictorial, it says that Mr. Vaughan Lloyd, a prominent footballer, has purchased a business in Melbourne and will leave Millawa early in December. On the 16th of December 1933, in the Melbourne Sun News Pictorial, it says that Millawa, Miss Omi Gardner, was entertained and received many presents before her marriage with Mr. V. Lloyd. Residents presented Mr. V. Lloyd, a prominent footballer, with an inscribed silver cake dish before he left to live in Melbourne. And Naomi died in 1983 at the age of 83. So, as quite often happens when you have second or third marriages, that there can be some disagreements in the family, particularly when it comes to probate and wills. And I'm sure that a lot of you out there listening have experienced it, or certainly know someone that has experienced some disruption in the family as a result of those. And the Gardner family was no exception to that.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.